attachment to this institution. I was a student here, I was a staff member here, I am married to an emeritus professor at UCT, and both my sons have UCT degrees. So you can see how, and my house is surrounded by UCT students, so you can see how fantastic it is to be part of this institution and to be back here today. But the last 8 days of a campaign are always the most difficult, because there is the greatest risk in those last 8 days that the campaign becomes very negative. And having won the debate on delivery so convincingly, not through assertions, but through proven fact, and stating those facts that have been gathered not only by national agencies, not only by the national government itself as more for the poor, but because we have won that debate so convincingly, our opponents, I'm afraid, are determined to make this election about something else. And in these last 8 days, they're going to desperately try to make this election about race. And they're going to try and turn it into a contest between race groups. Because the ANC believes that if it can turn every election into a contest and preferably a conflict between race groups, it is guaranteed and assured a victory. And that is why we have the very strong negativity that enters in the last phase of politics before an election. Now we're determined to keep this debate positive. We focused this local government election on service delivery from the very beginning, which is what it's about. Water, electricity, sanitation, roads, houses, etc., is the mandate of local government. And that is what we want to talk about and how we are going to take this forward. And so, we are determined not to be negative, but we're also determined to look at our own imperfections, which are many and varied. We're certainly not a perfect party by any means. And we don't run a perfect government, because no government in the world is perfect. Everywhere that we govern, there is still a very long way to go, because we've inherited a tragic legacy from a tragic and divided past in South Africa. And we absolutely acknowledge that. We're not perfect, but we do say we are better by far. And of course, it can never be enough. It can never be enough. But all a government can do is have a coherent plan to deliver primarily to the poor, to put the right people in the right places to do that, to have zero corruption in their ranks, and to spend all of their budgets on service delivery for the poor. More you cannot do. More you cannot do. And if you do that, at least you will be moving in the right direction step by step, every day, every week, every month, every year, rather than the alternative, which is endemic corruption, not spending budgets, which takes cities, provinces, and the country backwards step by step, week by week, and month by month. And after 5 years, you see the extreme difference of a place that has gone forward step by step, albeit not perfectly, and still with a long way to go, compared with a place that's been going backwards for 5 years. And then the difference becomes marked and extreme. And this is why, as Richard said, this election is unique, because for the very first time, voters can compare the records, the track records, of different parties that have been in government, none of which have delivered perfectly, and none of which have eradicated the legacy of the past, but some of which have made much more progress than others, and I will argue that those local authorities are under the Democratic Alliance. It's also very good to see that our democracy is maturing in the way that it is. And by maturing, I'm saying that voters from across the board in South Africa are saying that no political party owns us. No political party owns any category of voters, particularly not on a racial basis. Political parties have to earn voters' support. voters don't give away their votes permanently. They lend their votes to a political party for 5 years, and then do a serious comparison of outcomes between the track records of different parties in government. And there are incredibly encouraging signs that voters have started to do this in South Africa. Because this means that voters recognize that they have the power, and that they put politicians into positions. And if the politicians in those positions abuse their power, or steal their money, or don't spend the budgets on what they're supposed to be spending the budgets on, then the voters have the power and indeed the responsibility to remove those politicians from office. And that is the way in which our democracy is maturing. And indeed that is something to celebrate, for all of us to celebrate. And it's the very best sign we've had to date that we will succeed in our democracy. And I've never been more optimistic about South Africa than I am now. Obviously, civil society and the media and all the independent institutions are crucial to a democracy. But I take great issue with people who say that that is enough. Because unless voters are prepared to change their minds and vote for an alternative, you will never have incumbents in office being held accountable. And then if they know that they can always rely on a majority category of voters to vote them back every single time, there is nothing that stops that government from abusing power, from becoming more and more corrupt, and indeed, nothing to stop them heading in the inevitable trajectory towards a failed state. So voters are absolutely critical in this, and their capacity to hold their leaders to account is what makes the difference between a viable democracy and a failed state. And local government elections have been particularly important in this regard. Because in local government elections, voters are much more inclined to give another party a chance, are much more inclined to vote around service delivery issues rather than the great issues of symbolism and history. And so, this is how the Democratic Alliance became a party of government. We made up our mind a long time ago that it wasn't good enough just to be a party of opposition. Because if one party could always rely on the fact that they would always be re-elected, we were on a trajectory to a failed state, because power abuse and endemic corruption, and indeed the transformation in a negative sense of institutions that are supposed to be independent and serve the people into institutions that defend and support a power-abusing clique of the ruling party would be inevitable. So we had to be able to win elections. And we knew that the first place we could potentially win an election was at local government. And we set our sights massively high in 2006 to try and set out to win Cape Town, which we then did on a coalition of 7 parties. And as a result of that, and as a result of the outcome of that election and the service delivery that followed, and the turnaround of the economy and other things in the city of Cape Town, a decrease in crime, the province as a whole gave us an overall majority, a mandate of 51% in the last election. And this is simply because we changed what the national government described as the worst run metro in the country, i.e. Cape Town, under the ANC, into what that same national government has repeatedly described as the best run metro in the country under the DA. And you don't have to take my word for it. Look at Minister Sicelo Shiteka's UHABS index. And if you don't take our national government's index at face value, look at Empowerdex, which is a BEE rating agency. And it says that Cape Town is the best metro by far for service delivery. Having turned that situation around from, as Patricia says, 227 informal settlements that we inherited without any services whatsoever, into 227 settlements that are almost entirely up to the national basic standard. And if you don't want to believe Empowerdex, you can look at Moody's international rating system and see exactly the same kind of result. So our strategy has been to become a party of government, to allow that kind of comparison to be drawn, and to use that as a platform to convince South Africans that elections are not a contest between race groups. They are a mechanism of making policy choices and holding leaders to account for the outcome of those policy choices measured against the best interests of the most people. And that is what we have done, and that is what we will continue to do. And that is why these elections are so important for us. Because in these local government elections, we have to take the next step, and apart from trying to win Cape Town outright, we would like to get a platform in local government in as many provinces as possible. It's not going to be possible in every province, but we would like to follow the model that we've built in the Western Cape of winning at local government first, and building from there to as many other provinces as we possibly can. And if we can get this right in the 2011 local government election, that is 8 days from now, then I'm prepared